I'm making a game inspired by Mario Kart, Ski Free, and a bunch of other games. Welcome to Devlog 3. So I wanted to start out by thanking everyone for their input and excitement about the game on Discord and on YouTube. I read every comment, and though obviously I won't be implementing every single suggestion, I do take them into consideration, and those that I do use, I'll be sure to credit in the videos. Speaking of comments, a big part of what I worked on this month stemmed from a single Discord comment from my now good friend Pipers. He asked if I'd been testing my physics-based movement with network emulation turned on, with a cheeky little smiley face at the end. You see, the multiplayer solution I had working looks fine with 0 ping, but real network conditions aren't perfect. The Unreal documentation suggests testing with up to 500 milliseconds round-trip ping and 10% packet loss. Oh boy. For those who don't know, ping is a measurement of how long it takes for a message to be sent from your machine to the server and back again. In this example, it takes 250 milliseconds each way for a total of 500 milliseconds, which is what we'll be testing with. Packet loss is a measurement of what percentage of data is lost when communicating back and forth between your computer and the server. So if the server sends you 10 character position update packets over the course of a second and your computer only receives 9 of them, then you have 10% packet loss. This is also something we'll have to account for. So I set this up in Unreal's emulation settings, and the results were less than perfect. It was pretty clear I had a lot of work to do. But why is the character being yanked around so much? What's going on here? Well, allow me to tell you a story about my middle school days that might help illustrate the issue. It was the mid-2000s, and everyone and their mothers were playing Halo 2 on Xbox Live. My friend Max and I would race home and get online to play hours of team deathmatch, but in some games, Max had a particularly devious strategy. At some point during the match, Max would walk away from the TV and run upstairs to the living room where his modem was located. He would then press a button labeled Standby on the top of his modem, and suddenly his internet would go out. Immediately, everyone in the game would see a screen indicating they'd lost connection to the match. Well, everyone except for Max, who is now back downstairs going on a killing spree. By the time his internet connection had reset, it was already too late. Our opponents would slowly load back into the match, only to find they'd been assassinated while they were away. And while I don't condone this type of behavior, it was middle school, and we'd do anything for a win. So how did this work? In nearly all competitive online multiplayer games, you need an authority. You need one copy of the game running that decides who hit who and who can move where, and generally keeps the game in sync for all the players. Now, in most modern games, the host, or authority, is ran on a dedicated server that isn't actually controlling a player in the game. But in Halo 2, a random player would be assigned as the server authority, so when Max realized he was the host, he could briefly disconnect from the internet and continue to play on his authority version of the game while everyone else waited for his internet to come back online. Importantly, the server is also in charge of validating moves from the client. So if a client says, "Hey man, I moved from here to here," the server can say, "Actually, the last time I saw you, you were here, so according to my calculations, you are actually here now." This is called a correction, and that's what was happening when I started testing with poor network conditions. Because of the physics-simulated movement I mentioned in the first devlog, the client and server simulations were constantly getting out of sync when ping and packet loss were too high. So how do we fix this? Well, it turns out the character movement component I so quickly abandoned in the first 2 weeks of the project is full of crucial multiplayer features, and if I want to utilize things like client-side prediction and synchronized kinematic physics, I would have to go back and move all my skiing movement logic into a custom character movement component. But the catch is, this is really only possible with C++, so I'd have to familiarize myself with that. Thankfully, Pipers, as his Discord name implies, is fairly familiar with C++ and helped me write and debug some of my custom movement functions.
The slide along surface that you have below and the bounce function, they both have movement update. Oh, yeah, and then you increase speed like hell because there is no friction. I'm hoping you're recording this.
I also reached out to another YouTuber, Del Goody, who was kind enough to share some of his character movement knowledge and suggest ways I can further reduce net corrections in the future.
You're going to accept if you have packet loss that you're going to have net corrections, but if there's small net corrections, the character movement component will interpolate the capsule to that position, and like the player will just never know.
Del Goody has a devlog series for his zero-gravity first-person shooter game Astro that I highly suggest you guys check out. So after rewriting all of my skiing physics in C++, I had reduced network corrections by about 90% and decided it was a decent enough checkpoint to start on my next task, ski trails. I mentioned in the first devlog that I was planning on drawing meshes behind the player and using these in an RVT, and I tried this, but I was worried about the performance implications, and it just seemed like RVTs weren't really made for this type of thing. So I looked to this other game, Grand Mountain Adventure, which I think pulls off this effect really well. I actually found this really great interview with the developers where they talk about their custom engine and how they generate their landscapes, and they even talk here about how they implement their snow trails by stretching a giant texture over the entire landscape and using that as a height map. This sounded like a decent plan to me, so I went about creating some components that would generate a massive texture that I could map over the landscape. Then, every frame, I draw a series of triangles for each ski between the new and the old position of the skis. And the last thing to do was use this texture as a bump map so I could add normals to the existing snow materials. If you look closely, you can see that the bump map affects only the normals and doesn't actually deform the landscape. So it's a bit of an optical illusion, but I'd rather start from here and add height offsets later if I decide I need it. I also created the system by which different actors can have different sizes and shapes for their snow trails. So you can see here that the snow boulder and the penguin missile have custom trails. And so, after resolving some texture sizing and mip mapping issues, I had something working that I was pretty happy with and decided to start work on a couple new items. Introducing Full Body Freeze. Alright, so the name is a work in progress, but I've got to give credit for the sliding ice cube idea to Synthetic. This is an offensive ability that can be used to dash into other players and freeze them, causing them to skid across the map and potentially off the mountain. I wanted to work on another offensive ability with some unique characteristics. I found that this ability is already really fun to mess around with, but I'd still like to take it a little further. I was considering having a frozen character freeze other characters on impact, and this could have some cool chain reaction effects. There are definitely some balance considerations though, since this ability is kind of OP right now. And the next item I worked on, introducing hot chocolate. Alright, so this one's really simple. I wanted to add a basic boost ability similar to the mushroom in Mario Kart, and I really liked Wasatch Wynn's idea of calling this hot chocolate. This ability adds an immediate burst of speed followed by a sustained, lighter speed boost. I think it could be fun once I get the updated characters in the game to give them a trigger animation to show them guzzling hot chocolate and maybe releasing steam or something. It was also a bit of a challenge to make sure that the AI only used this on straightaways, since it's a pretty dangerous ability to trigger during sharp turns. Alright, so the last thing I worked on this month was character design. As you can probably tell, I'm not a professional artist or even familiar with any tools like Illustrator or Photoshop, but what I lack in skill I make up for with patience and my ability to keep trying until my eyes bleed. So I just started by drawing on pen and paper. I want all the characters to be animals, and my point of reference were Animal Crossing characters, particularly the sad and angry ones. The first one I decided to model was this walrus guy. I think the advantage that Mario Kart has and a lot of other racing games don't is that all these characters have their own games and their own backstories. It's a bit difficult to establish characters with as much personality in a standalone game, but I'd really like to try. I'm gonna leave my plans for the story and the lore behind the game for another devlog, but what I can tell you is that all the playable characters in the game will be world-class skiers that are competing with you, the up-and-comer, and even though I'm trying to emulate these really cute Animal Crossing characters, I want them all to be a little messed up. Maybe one of the characters is using performance-enhancing drugs, and one of them could be like a trust fund kid. Maybe one of them is a self-obsessed fitness influencer who is always staring at their phone. Anyway, the walrus was my first character, and I was overall quite happy with how he turned out. Though I'll definitely be going back and making adjustments as I design more characters. After the walrus, I went about drawing this kind of grumpy, evil wolf character. On this one I just drew the face and left all the body details for Blender. After a few failed modeling attempts, I decided to start by using an Animal Crossing character for reference. I used this to copy the proportions and start doing some sculpting on top of that. I learned a lot about sculpting in Blender in the process and honestly had quite a bit of fun with it. I'm excited to get better at Blender and already feel more confident in my ability to create things the way that I want them instead of just close enough, which is what I've settled with for a while. I played around with different texture paints for his fur and found a lot of looks I don't like. After trying out a couple different looks, I ended up really liking this kind of cartoonier goth wolf look. I made a jacket for him, which took way longer than I'd like to admit, and for everyone who's been asking for swappable outfits and gear, that's definitely something on the roadmap. As I continue to get better at modeling this year, I'll be going back and iterating on these characters, but I'm pretty excited to start animating these guys. And that about wraps it up for this month. I'd love to hear your guys' ideas for new characters and items, so feel free to leave a comment below and join the discussion in the Discord, and remember to subscribe if you haven't already. As always, thanks for watching, and see you next time.